I think the more experience you have as a fantasy football player, the more advantages you can find doing early drafts.
Make sure you got your just bankroll ready and know how you're going to manage it throughout the season. If you made money last season, that means that you should be set up to be able to bet a little bit more.
I think if you do your homework, fantasy betting wise, there are certainly edges that you can get getting into the market early.
Don't overplay what happened last year. Don't fight last year's battle.
What do you think? What are you doing right now? What do you think is a good idea for bettors and fantasy players to start prepping right now?
Yeah, I mean, we can start with the fantasy side of things. Obviously, that's our bread and butter over at RotoWire. We continue to expand our betting content as well, but fantasy is where we've made our bones over the years. And a lot of expert leagues will start drafting this time of year, if not even earlier. And it's really interesting when you compare the results. If you do a draft in, say, mid-June versus late August, you're going to see completely different results as far as guys rising up the board, guys falling as we get news, as we get injuries, once we get into training camp, once we reach the preseason. I think the more experience you have as a fantasy football player, the more advantages you can find doing early drafts. If you're prepared, if you're studying guys coming out of the draft, if you know everything you need to know this time of year, I think there are certainly advantages to be had. You can identify, certain players who are vastly undervalued. And as more and more people flood into the market, more people start doing drafts, the average draft position, ADP, as we call it, tends to standardize. I think of someone like Isaiah Pacheco, Travis Etienne, one of my favorite fantasy running backs this year, guys like that, we're going at an extreme discount if you were doing early drafts. And, now if you check in on kind of week to week ADP, you'll see players rising. And you're thinking, man, I was getting that guy at pick 102 a couple of weeks ago, and now I got to draft him 2 rounds higher. So there is value to be had, much like the betting market. Sometimes you can get burned, right? Where, something looks great in mid-June, and then, we get an update, and, it turns out the Jaguars actually really like Bashal Tutin, or they really like Tank Bigsby. And then maybe Travis Etienne doesn't look so good by the time we get to training camp. But I think if you do your homework, fantasy betting wise, there are certainly edges that you can get getting into the market early. One thing I would say, Kelley, as far as, if you're betting win totals, if you're looking at these conference odds, division odds, I think it can be really easy to hyper focus on the schedule, to look through and say, oh man, this team has the 3rd easiest schedule on paper in the NFL. And you go through and you start circling games. Oh, that's a win. That's a win. That's a win. Look, it's the NFL. We know injuries are going to set in. We know unpredictable things are going to happen. I think going into last year, the example that I always go back to is if you were looking at the Green Bay Packers or the San Francisco 49ers, you probably weren't circling, that Niners game late in the season and saying, oh, that'll be an easy win for Green Bay because Brandon Allen will be the 49ers starting quarterback. So I think it could be easy to go through a schedule, just circle games and kind of feel like what is going to be definitive, but so much is going to change context-wise as the season goes along.
Yeah, Jeff, I'm going to jump in right there before I hand things over to you because Nick brought up a point that I wanted to kind of lead with, too. I think this is as you're kind of doing a lot of your NFL prep and handicapping for right now. I think it's great for when you're looking at win totals. Now that we know, hey, we have all these in-season markets, win totals, yes, no playoffs. You should look at where those schedules stack up for each team, and maybe there are teams that start off more difficult and a little bit easier. You can kind of make notes on your calendar, on your schedules of, hey, week 5 looks like a good spot that I might want to jump in on an over on a win total instead of playing it preseason with how tough the beginning of that schedule is. So I think making a lot of schedule notes like that right now can be very beneficial. That is something that I am absolutely doing during my prep work here. A couple other things. If you're betting stuff right now, and I have made bets, you're always making bets assuming that you're going to get at least the same number as when we get close to the season or a better number than when it's getting. You're looking for some of those outlier prices that you expect to get shorter and shorter as we get closer to the season. Another thing is just kind of setting up how your season's going to go, right? Make sure that you're signed up at enough sports books that you are comfortable with to be able to shop numbers. Maybe there are different sports books like a DraftKings out there that still offers minus 120 on 6-point teasers when nobody else is doing that. You're going to want to make sure you have all your accounts set up to be ready to go to bet during the football season. This is also about that time of year. Make sure that you're all funded, properly funded. If there's a lot of people like me, you get done with some of your core sports betting, you pull a lot of those funds out, a lot of those funds out of those accounts to do other things with. Now's the time to make sure you've got all the money set and all the number of accounts that you need. Make sure you got your just bankroll ready and know how you're going to manage it throughout the season. If you made money last season, that means that you should be set up to be able to bet a little bit more going forward and hopefully continue to build off of that, bankroll. And then I think this is a great time of year to do this is from a betting standpoint. I think this works for fantasy too. Go back and look what you've done over the years. What have you done right? What have you done wrong? Maybe you're betting road dogs or road favorites really well or something like that. Might be an outlier, but if you look over 4 years and see it, you find it that it's a thing that you've done pretty well at. Make note of it. These are things that I think you can do during this time of year. Jeff Erickson, how about you? What are you kind of looking at? What would you throw out there for suggestions for bettors and fantasy players?
So one quick fantasy note is don't overplay what happened last year. Don't fight last year's battle. Last year, all these older running backs had great seasons. After years and years of people telling us that, you got to fade running backs after age 28 or something of that nature. Maybe Derrick Henry is just a superhuman. And let's look at that there. He is built different than every other running back that we've ever had. So he may continue to be great even into his low 30s, mid 30s. That happens occasionally, but don't fight last year's battle. I think that it's really important to review what happened last year. And I think you're right about doing that, and especially from a betting perspective. But you don't want to really chase all your mistakes. Learn what was a fundamental mistake versus, okay, I was wrong about this player. I think it's really important to know that. Learn the fantasy gaming aspect of that there as well. From a betting perspective, I think one of the things you need to look at too is things get more granular the more, and the odds vary a little bit more the more granular you get. So be prepared to shop around when you're looking for individual player props, for instance, there. I think you can find some edges.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, that's where I think make sure you have the right number of books set up that you feel comfortable with, like Jeff's talking about. Whether we're talking player props, game lines, anything, you want to be able to shop. You want to be able to shop quick and get in on the best of the numbers throughout the entire season.